So I would recommend it to people who really, really love reality TV. Like if you are a Love Island or Big Brother fan, Iris Murdoch novels are for you.
Hello and welcome to the Booker Prize podcast with me, James Walton.
And me, Jo Hamya.
And today it's Book of the Month time. And our chosen novel for November is The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch, who for many years was the answer to the quiz question, who's been shortlisted for the Booker Prize the most times. In fact, she still holds the record of 6, though these days jointly with, fingers on the buzzers,
Margaret Atwood.
2 points, Joe. But even so, Murdoch's continuing status as a Booker Prize ledge.
Not ledge.
Ledge. She's a Booker Prize ledge, is why earlier this year the Booker Prize trophy was renamed the Iris. But before we joust with the Black Prince, see what I did there? Maybe we should do a bit on Murdoch more generally, given that, while she's certainly not forgotten now, she has perhaps faded a little since the time I remember growing up as a bookish little fellow in the 1970s, when she seemed to be pretty much the main writer of choice among clever grown-ups. But Joe, as this podcast keeps humiliatingly reminding me, I was born quite a long time before you, so what was her standing when you were first discovering grown-up books in what I guess was 2010s or something scary like that? I ask partly because that famous 1983 Granta list of best of young British novelists with the likes of Julian Barnes, Martin Amis, Ian McEwan, Salman Rushdie, Kazuo Ishiguro, and even a few women, I think, has been seen ever since as fiction moving on to a new generation. And maybe Murdoch was the leader of the generation it moved on from. So was she still a big deal for people of your age?
I don't know. The problem is, I think at that age I had no conception of what Granta even was. Because it's not really the pursuit of most 16-year-olds. The way I came to Iris Murdoch is actually really random. I lived in Florida at the time. And I remember a secondhand bookshop that was based in like a disused garage, and parents of a friend of mine used to take us there to leave us for an hour so that they could be free to go do other things. Quite
impressed that the way of looking after you was to dump you in a bookshop for an hour.
Oh yeah, well, we were nerds. And it was amazing because there was no shelving. It was just piles and piles of books. And I remember finding a copy of The Sea, and I had no idea who Iris Murdoch was, and I had no idea that The Sea was a Booker winner. I think I vaguely knew what the Booker Prize was then. Anyway, the cover then of that book, it was the first edition, weirdly enough, was Hokusai's The Wave, which I just studied in my AP Art History class. And I kind of saw everything as a sign then. So I thought, oh, it's a sign that I found this novel. And here we are, many years later, 10 years later, talking about it. Picked it up, sort of put it aside for 2 more years. And then read it one winter and just fell in love with it so deeply. I think it's sort of the case, though, that if you've read one Iris Murdoch novel, you've sort of read all of them in a way, because she has a very specific style, and she has certain narrative devices that she keeps coming back to. So this idea of, extramarital affairs, sort of love squares. Usually they're love triangles, but in an Iris Murdoch novel, it's always, the husband is having an affair with someone else, the wife is having an affair with someone else, and then, maybe they'll like swap midway through. Someone dies, someone ends up with documents that they shouldn't. You can always tell what an Iris Murdoch is, but the delight of them is sort of the variety. You never quite know how she's going to pull it off in the next novel.
There's a good description by John Updike on Nuns and Soldiers, but this is all books, it's all ever books, which is one man dies, everybody else falls in love, and nobody can help anything.
Yes, and there's always a lot of amazing dialogue of just people relentlessly cutting across each other, screaming, oh, get out, I can't bear it anymore. And then, would you like a glass of wine?
I must say, with their dialogue, and I'm not sure it's how people speak, but it's how people speak in an Iris Murdoch novel, isn't it? And that kind of works.
I don't know. Do you know what? I read, I'm sure I've spoken about it on this podcast before, but I also love Rosemary Tonks, and her novel, The Bloater, is very much like this sort of, Iris Murdoch novels. At least part of them tend to be set in kind of a London cultural scene, whether it's, a kind of theatre scene in the sea, or Westminster and the Nice and the Good, or in this case with The Black Prince, it's between Soho and Notting Hill. And there is that kind of, I think most people would associate it with a Hampstead novel, but there is that very posh, plummy way of talking, and that sort of, almost like you're at the theatre. It's very Noel Coward in a way. And I think it is a kind of tradition of novels of the time of, maybe 60s or 70s London literary novels.
Everybody always observes over, like, how do these characters make their money? It's like, Monica's flat in Friends or something, isn't it? Yeah, the people are living, somehow really, really well without obvious means of support. Perhaps because she's written so many, like 26 novels. And I think you've read more of them than I have. What are your favourites?
Well, The Sea is probably still a favourite because it was that initial discovery. It's narrated by a sort of semi-retired theatre man called Charles Araby, who's retired to the sea to think over his life and write his memoirs. And instead, he gets very obsessed with his first love. She sort of reappears in his life, and he has this like comically angelic view of her, even though she's old and plain and sort of entirely boring. He kidnaps her at some point, and it's just mad. Also love A Severed Head, which is sort of, again, another classic kind of Murdoch story of a love square, or even a love, what's a 5-sided object?
Pentagon.
Like pentagon. Of an extramarital affair, potentially something approaching incest, and then an untimely death.
The usual stuff then.
Yeah.
And I know that is a big favourite with many of our fans. I have read that.
Murdoch would be really dismayed to know that I really like Under the Net, because I think that there's this beautiful recording of her at the 92Y doing a Paris Review interview where she says, I hate it when people say to me that they love my first novel, because one sort of thinks everything's gone downhill since.
Yeah, that's right. Should we do a basic biography just for people who don't know as much about her as people might once have done? So she was born in Dublin, the only child of Irish Protestant parents, and when she was 1, the family moved to London, where her dad worked as a clerk for the Ministry of Health. But she always, as she said throughout her life, that she always felt Irish, although true to her Protestant roots, was no Republican when the Troubles broke out.
But her extreme cleverness was clearly there from the early days. At Badminton, a progressive girls' boarding school in Oxford, she edited a poetry book by the pupils and got W.H. Auden to write the foreword. She then won a scholarship to Oxford, where she scored a first-class degree in Greats, which is Latin, Greek, ancient history and philosophy. And later, she also won a scholarship to the prestigious Vassar College in America, but wasn't allowed to go into the country because while at Oxford, she joined the Communist Party.
Along rather improbably, I believe, with Kingsley Amis. Not necessarily thought of as a commie, but he joined the party with her as well, her contemporary and a lifelong friend. She'd left the party by the time she was conscripted into the civil service. Because it was war, it was actual conscription.
Yeah.
In 1942, she worked in the Treasury, and then she joined the UN Refugee Service in Europe before returning to academia and teaching philosophy at Oxford from 1948 to 1963.
And by 1963, 2 other important things had happened in her life. She'd become a novelist, starting with, my beloved Under the Net in 1954, and continuing very prolifically after that, ending up with, as you said, James 26 novels, which is an unusually high number for a literary novelist. And there are some people who think she perhaps wrote too much, including possibly her, as we may discuss when we come to The Black Prince.
And as we say, 6 of those books were Booker shortlisted. The Nice and the Good in 1969, the first year of the prize. Bruno's Dream in 1970, the second year of the prize. Black Prince in 1973. Your beloved The Sea in 1978, which won. Good Apprentice in 1985, and The Book and the Brotherhood in 1987. And seeing as she'd already written 10 novels before the Booker began, including A Severed Head, beloved.
They're all beloved. I love them all.
And the Bell, which I really like, that was pre-Booker. I mean, who knows how many she might have been shortlisted if the prize had begun earlier. She also wrote several works of philosophy. And I was interested, although, to be honest, slightly saddened that In Our Time, Radio 4 episode about her with Melvyn Bragg and his guests, suggested that it's as a philosopher that she might be best remembered in the end.
Well, the second thing about her is her fascinating love life. Actually, if I think about it now, very ahead of the times, ahead of the curve love life, what we might now refer to, or maybe it was referred to then as well, who knows, James, you can correct me, as this sort of polyamorous open marriage.
I wasn't around in the 50s. Or the 40s. I might be old.
Well, we don't mention this for reasons of gossip or tittle tattle.
No way.
But it is relevant to a lot of her fiction.
Because John Updike, who's one of the problematic American geniuses stroke dinosaurs I keep mentioning. He considered Murdoch the preeminent English novelist of the second half of the 20th century, but he also thought, quote, her tumultuous love life had been a long tutorial in suffering, power, treachery and bliss. The romantic seed for her was like the sea for Conrad or war for Hemingway, a treasury of essential impression. So basically, that complicated love life informs all of her fiction, which is why we're mentioning it, not for reasons of, as you say, gossip. That would be terrible. So it fed into more or less all of her fiction, with one of her central themes being a sentence she wrote in The Sacred and Profane Love Machine: the erotic life is never still. The news that love is everywhere, violent, protean, consuming, comical, cruel, never grew stale for her, Updike said, and Harold Bloom, another big American critic, called her an original and endlessly provocative theorist of the tragicomedy of sexual love. And that love life seems to have continued even after she married John Bailey in 1956, an Oxford Don who's rarely described anywhere without the words mild-mannered being used.
And that marriage to Bailey brings us, of course, to what I think I and a lot of other people are worried has become her legacy in a way, in a strange way, that she ended up with Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, I know this is not a phrase you want to use, but I think a lot of people now think of Iris Murdoch as someone who basically chortled in front of the Teletubbies. And we know this because of Bailey's memoir Iris, which was published in 1998 when she was still alive, and later adapted into the hit movie Iris, starring Kate Winslet as the young Murdoch and Judi Dench as the older one. A film, as someone once said, that showed Iris Murdoch only as either bonkers or bonking.
Yeah, I hate that film.
Yeah, I hate that film too. And do you think, I mean, I've got, fortunately everyone's dead now, but do you think this was John Bailey's sort of passag revenge for her infidelity and for her greater fame? Maybe not even all that pass. I mean, can I give you a couple of quotes from the book?
Yeah, you can,
Okay, this is
absolutely.
okay. So Iris was praised for its gentleness and its love, but I do wonder if its motives were quite so pure. You know, there's a bit like, you know, I feel the whole book is look, not so clever now, are you? I mean, maybe that's a bit ferocious, but there's one bit where, like, for example, she tells him about her lovers, and John Bailey says this in a sort of, I think, faux gentle, slightly weird way. I was really very cast down by everything she had just been telling me. There seemed so many of them, these fortunate persons who at some time or other had been the recipient of Iris's kindness. They had desired her and not been rejected. And again, is this really an admiring bit? He says that when he's ill, she says, what I appreciated too was Iris's complete indifference to the womanly image of a helpmate. She found no bother at all in getting on with it when I was ill. Do you think he's really pleased about that? Oh, okay, just one more. There's loads of them. There's a bit where they sing together a song about cuckolding from Shakespeare while they're driving in the car, and he thinks it's the most tremendous fun. But he is essentially being cuckolded quite a lot, I think. And then he finds a house and that he loves that she doesn't. And he says, she acted as if her enthusiasm matched my own. I saw that it didn't, of course, but I was obdurate. Why shouldn't I be obdurate for once? And then when she's actually ill, I think this is a chilling phrase. He says, now we are together for the first time. So he's got her now that she's got Alzheimer's. And in The Black Prince, there's a lot of women who kind of get exposed at their worst. Come on to The Black Prince in a minute, listeners, never fear. When they're exposed at their worst, they're feeling down or they're hysterical or they're upset or they're ill, and their husbands sort of invite people around to sort of look after them or see them. And the women hate it. So one who says, he asks you around to see it all men despise all women really. And then a separate woman, ashamed, oh ashamed, showing me to all these people. And I sort of feel that Iris would have been ashamed that she was being shown to all these people by John Bailey. Am I being too harsh on him, do you think?
No, I think that's entirely fair. Down with John Bailey.
and that is what people think of Iris Murdoch, this.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe it's a bit dramatic to say that that's all that people think of Iris Murdoch, because she is, after all, also a respected philosopher, the author of 26 novels. My prevailing image of Iris Murdoch really is just of this incredible woman with like the most unkempt bowl cut you've ever seen in your life, saying the most brilliant things to camera, you know, stern, intimidating, until all of a sudden you realise that she's the funniest person in the room. And I think, I don't know, I'm so jealous of anyone who managed to be taught by her in the brief time that she was still at university. I think it must have been very, very frightening until all of a sudden you realised that you were the luckiest person alive.
This might be ungallant or possibly even slightly worse, but she doesn't look an obvious seductress, does she? But it's one bit in her biography where she says, one thing I'm confident of, I can seduce anybody. And I would, A, that seems to have been true in her life, and B, certainly true of her books, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's not all about looks, it's a vibe as well, James, you know.
Really? Okay, yeah, no, maybe it is. Should we move on rather hastily to The Black Prince? And do you want to tell us the basic?
The basic plot of... Is there a basic plot?
That's hard. That is a hard one.
I'm going to start out by saying, this sounds a bit strange, but I think you'll know where I'm coming from, James. Anyone who listened to our interview with Graham McCrae Burnett and has read His Bloody Project will kind of understand the form that The Black Prince takes. There are multiple documents which alter your perception of the main body of the narrative in quite ingenious ways, and there is a sort of crime at the heart that's gradually revealed to you. So our main character is Bradley Pearson, who, depending who you ask, is a writer.
If you ask him, he's definitely a writer.
If you ask him, he is definitely a writer, although I think his idea of writing depends very heavily on not writing.
I'd love to come back to that, but yeah.
We will come back to that. But the book opens on two sort of editorial notes, one from a Mr. P. Loxius, who is his editor, and one from Bradley himself. There are some quite salient lines in those editorial notes, which become ever more sort of relevant as you go through the novel. So Mr. P. Loxius says that art gives charm to terrible things as perhaps its glory, perhaps its curse. Art is a doom. It has been the doom of Bradley Pearson. And Bradley Pearson himself says, all art deals with the absurd and aims at the simple. Good art speaks truth. Indeed is truth, perhaps the only truth. I have endeavoured in what follows to be wisely artful and artfully wise. Which brings us on to the main body of The Black Prince, which is sort of a five-way love story. Bradley Pearson is making plans to leave London to work on his novel, having finally retired from the tax office.
Even that's quite good, isn't he? He introduces himself as a writer. He realises he's been a taxman all his life.
Yes.
But actually, he's going to write his great novel.
Yes, now he's going to write his great work. When all of a sudden he is intruded upon by his ex-wife's brother, Francis, who has arrived to give him the news that Christian, said ex-wife, is back in town and may call in on him. Shortly after, while Francis is still quite unwantedly in the room, Bradley is further interrupted by a phone call from his friend / protege / rival, Arnold Baffin, who says he may have killed his wife. He's not sure. Francis happens to be a doctor of sorts, although he's been disbarred for handing out dodgy prescriptions. Bradley takes him over to Arnold's place, manages to revive Rachel Baffin, draw her out of the bedroom, manages to have a conversation with Rachel, which includes that line that you quoted from of, he's invited you all round to look at me in this terrible state. And then goes back home to find his sister Priscilla on his doorstep, who has just left her husband, Roger. Roger is shacked up, in fact, has been shacked up for quite some time with a younger lover named Marigold, who is now pregnant. And this becomes a very salient point for Priscilla's very fragile mental health. She is suicidal from the very beginning of the novel, but no one seems to believe her. No one, particularly Bradley, seems to believe in the concept of mental health in this book.
Bradley also takes a dim view of someone going off with a younger woman at this point, doesn't he?
Yes, which is very hypocritical of him. Because it's very hard to track all the people falling in love with each other over the course of this novel. But Bradley eventually falls for Arnold and Rachel's 20-year-old daughter, Julian, by way of giving her lessons on Shakespeare, particularly Hamlet, which is very pertinent. But this happens only after Rachel has fallen in love with him, and he has sort of tolerated it, but tolerated it as far as sort of groping her breasts in bed a bit.
That's nice. Meanwhile, of course, Arnold has fallen in love with Christian, his ex-wife, hasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
And according to Bradley's telling of this novel, Christian may be sort of in love with Bradley as well.
Yeah.
Not only that, but Christian's brother Francis might be in love with Bradley. It's not clear. He's certainly very devoted to him.
And Bradley might be in love with Arnold. Seriously, no, we exaggerate not at all. So that all builds up to one sort of major crime.
Crescendo.
Yeah, we know there's going to be a big crime. We don't know what it is, and then we hear it from his point of view, from Bradley's point of view, and then all the other characters then comment at the end about whether he's telling the truth or not.
Yes.
Well, I think we could go on for much longer about the various tangles, but I think that's the basic plot, isn't it?
Yes, and this is so true of all Iris Murdoch novels, is that essentially what you have is a cast of about 5 to 10 characters who are just having the most chaotic, messy, I believe what Jada Pinkett Smith would call entanglements with one another. And you'd think it's sort of hard to keep in your head, but honestly, part of it is a bit like watching Love Island or like reality TV. You're just like gobsmacked. And my partner was turning to me while I was reading this book in bed, and he kept going, God, this must be amazing. Like, you keep gasping, you keep sort of like jumping up and then like, you know, shaking your head and groaning and laughing. It's exactly like what you look like when you watch Love Island.
No, that's interesting. And also the fact that we're laughing as we're saying so-and-so's in love with so-and-so's also in love with so-and-so's might be in love with... I mean, it is meant to be funny, I think. Iris Murdoch, in a way, thinks all of this, you know, the power of erotic love is, on the one hand, you know, dangerous and powerful and treacherous and damaging and also hilarious.
Yes.
She might be right. Now, on the hilarity point, can I ask you a question? So most of it's narrated by Bradley Pearson, and he's sometimes described as self-mocking.
Yes.
But do you think he is in on the joke? Let me a couple of things. So he uses inverted commas for more or less any word or phrase coined since about 1900, doesn't he? So he says this book, because we know that something sensational happens in it that he's involved in. We don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. Says, this book might well prove my only, quote, bestseller, partly because he's become, quote, front-page news. And then when he's describing his wife, he says, Christian was a rather, quote, sexy woman. And then he's got all these, like, of courses. Of course, the mind of the lover abhors accident. And when Julian, Iris Murdoch's, I think, famous for female characters with boys' names, but anyway, Julian, the 20-year-old girl he falls for, he says, so named, comma, I hardly need explain, after Julian of Norwich. And also, and is he joking? Okay, there's this bit where, after he's sort of failed with Rachel, she's tried to seduce him and slightly failed, and then on the way out, he bumps into her 20-year-old daughter and decides to buy her a pair of boots, and sees their thighs as a result of buying a pair of boots. Yeah. And experiences, quote, the anti-gravitational aspiration of the male organ.
Yes.
One of the oddest and most unnerving things in nature. Yes. And later when he takes Julian out, they go to the Covent Garden Opera. He's so sort of overcome with emotion, he hasn't told her that he loves her at this point, that he vomits, and he goes sort of running off. And but he stops to say, selection of a place to be sick in is always a matter of personal importance and can add an extra tormenting dimension to the graceless horror of vomiting. And after he finds a place by a pile of peach boxes and throws up, we have a paragraph beginning, vomiting is a curious experience, entirely sui generis. And he goes on to explain why. Now, obviously, I think this is all very funny, but surely it's Iris Murdoch being funny rather than Bradley Pearson, do you think?
Yes, I think I would agree with you, actually. There's this bit sort of midway through, what Bradley Pearson often does is sort of make these little interludes to address his editor, P. Loxius, directly, but, you know, obviously it seems as though he's also addressing the reader. I guess Loxius is his reader, but we're his reader. Anyway, there's a point at which during one of these interludes he says, it was not frivolous to connect my sense of an impending revelation with my anxiety about my work. If some great change was pending in my life, this could not but be part of my development as an artist, since my development as an artist was my development as a man. And then he says, it had often, when I thought most profoundly about it, occurred to me that I was a bad artist because I was a coward, would now courage in life prefigure and perhaps induce courage in art. And I think you're right, it is Murdoch being funny rather than Bradley Pearson being funny, because for him, there is no separation between it. I think he's telling us these things, you know, what it's like to vomit, what it's like to get an erection in these very lofty terms, very earnestly, because it speaks to his moral character in some sort of way. You know, there's this bit in the editor's note that Bradley Pearson provides where he says that he's going to, you know, the tale that follows is told as though it were happening to him in the moment. Yeah, he hopes he has kept his gift pure, which to me is sort of, you know, I think the other thing that kind of gives it away is that he is kind of like a sickening misogynist.
Yeah, so I mean, he is misogynist. He thinks all these women are ghastly. But then that bit at the end where they all have their say, Christian and Rachel and Julian, they are all ghastly. So again, this might yet again not be an either or, but a both and. But I do think that Iris Murdoch is not entirely distanced from Bradley's view of these.
I don't know, because I think she emasculates him to a massive degree as well, and him and Francis as well. I mean, like, you know, Bradley's always sort of insisting that everyone should, you know, repress their feelings always. But you know that part where Francis starts telling Bradley, you know, I've been so unhappy in my life. When they struck me off the register, I thought I'd die of unhappiness. I've never had a happy relationship, never. I crave for love. Everybody does. It's as natural as pissing, and I've never had a bloody crumb of it. And Bradley just goes, stop talking this foul rubbish. Yeah. Try to be a man. And, you know, Francis is there going, I can't. Oh, God, it's just the bloody pain. I'm not like other people. My life just doesn't work. And Bradley goes, I'm going to bed. If you got your sleeping bag there, you know, shut up.
He absolutely does. And Bradley regards like nervous breakdowns and hysterics as sort of in some ways self-indulgent, doesn't
Yes. But I mean, Bradley's not exempt from having a sort of nervous breakdown or his own bout of hysterics towards the end of the novel as well. And I don't think that's sort of, you know, the men are just as contemptible as the women in this novel.
For sure.
But I think, I don't know, maybe this is my bias as a woman reading this novel, but there's a very sort of self-conscious aspect of how the way in which men are terrible in this book that actually is expressed by the women outwardly, whether it's in the afterwards by Christian, you know, saying that she completely disagreed with Bradley's portrayal of her as a horrible wife. You know, Bradley says that he left her and she says, no, well, I left him because we were just both very depressed. He didn't make me happy. Or indeed, you know, Rachel, after she's just been hit with a poker by Arnold, her husband, and she says, you know, all men hate women, really. You know, he shoots me down, he beats me all the time. All the men in this novel cheat on their wives relentlessly and then say, oh, you know, I don't cheat on her presently. So I haven't really in the past.
Well, I was cheating on the husbands a bit, but no, you are right. There's certainly, but it is interesting though. An interesting fact about Iris Murdoch is a lot of first-person narrators in her many novels. Not one of them is a woman. She only ever does male first-person narrators who do get the piss taken remorselessly out of them, I think. Can I introduce another biggish theme at this late stage? I think about discussing The Black Prince, I think, is in sort of half an hour. It's like discussing, you know, Middlemarch in half an hour or something. It's just a massive book. I remember saying this is one of the best books I can remember reading for a long, long time. Yeah. But one thing I think that is definitely going on is Iris Murdoch's, there's a sort of self-portrait or at least self-discussion from Murdoch herself. So Bradley Pearson's theory of Hamlet is that Shakespeare is passionately exposing himself, speaking as few artists can speak, in the first person, yet at the pinnacle of artifice. And I think, again, this might be one of the things that Iris Murdoch agrees with Bradley Pearson about, and it's certainly what's going on in this book, I think. Because Arnold Baffin, who is, we may not have mentioned, I think, yet, is a very successful novelist. And according to Julian, his daughter, she says about him, he lives in a sort of rosy haze with Jesus and Mary and Buddha and Shiva and the Fisher King, all chasing round and round, dressed as people in Chelsea. Now that's about the most savage thing you could say about Iris Murdoch's books, really. We have a summary of another of his books where basically people talk about religion forever until someone's killed by a falling crucifix.
Yeah.
And Baffin is constantly criticised by everyone, as Iris Murdoch was, for writing too much and too fast. Bradley says of him, Arnold, I regret to say, saw art as fun.
Yeah.
So everybody agrees that he wrote too fast and too much. But at the same time, there's definitely a strand in the novel which asks what's wrong with writing a lot. Early on, Bradley says of Arnold, he wrote easily, producing every year a book which pleased the public taste. Wealth, fame followed, which is quite Murdoch-y. Arnold, I regret to say, he says, saw art as fun, where the joke, why is that a matter of regret? Is that really so bad? And I think we're definitely meant to draw a comic contrast between Arnold Baffin, who in some ways is preposterous with his, seeing Jesus and Mary and things in Chelsea, but with Bradley, who, when he introduces himself as a writer, again, pretty pompously right at the beginning, says, a writer is indeed the simplest and also most accurate general description of me. Insofar as I'm also a psychologist, an amateur philosopher, a student of human affairs, I am so because these things are part of being the kind of writer that I am. But one thing that isn't part of being the kind of writer that he is actually writing. So he says, I have, I hope, and believe, kept my gift pure. The most potent and sacred command which can be laid upon any artist is the command wait. There are, I hazard, saints of art who have simply waited mutely all their lives rather than profane the purity of a single page. So, and it really reminded me that, I don't know if you read The Debts of Pleasure by John Lanchester.
I haven't, no.
There's a similarly, I wonder if in fact he's almost influenced by The Black Prince, but there's a guy in that who is trying to impress a young woman with exactly that theory. He says, an artist should be assessed by what he doesn't do, a painter by his abandoned and unattempted canvases, a writer by his refusal to publish or indeed to inscribe. And then the woman replies to him, yeah, but how can you tell? How does anyone know about the books you aren't writing? What's so different from just sitting there on your bum?
Yeah.
Iris Murdoch is on the one hand saying, maybe I do write too much. Maybe I have got these Arnold Baffian tendencies. But it's better than just not writing anything and sitting around on your bum.
Yes, I think she addresses that head on quite early on. Pearson writes a sort of scathing review of Baffin's latest novel, to which Baffin at some point responds. It doesn't get published, but he reads it nevertheless and responds, you and you aren't the only one. Every critic tends to do this. Speak as if you're addressing a person of invincible complacency. You speak as if the artist has never realised his faults at all. In fact, most artists understand their own weaknesses far better than the critics do. And this I found very touching. Baffin says, I believe that the stuff has some merits or I wouldn't publish it. But I live with an absolutely continuous sense of failure. I'm always defeated, always. Every book is the wreck of a perfect idea. The years pass, and one has only one life. If one has a thing at all, one must do it, and keep on and on and on trying to do it better. And an aspect of this is that any artist has to decide how fast to work. I do not believe that I would improve if I wrote less. The only result of that would be that there would be less of whatever there is, and less of me. I could be wrong, but I judge this and stand by the judgment. Do you understand? An alternative would be to do what you do, finish nothing, publish nothing, nourish a continual grudge against the world, and live with an unrealised idea of perfection which makes you feel superior to those who try and fail. So I want to connect this.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
That
is the rebuttal, isn't it?
Yeah, and I want to connect this actually to, funnily enough, the section about vomiting,
okay,
which is, not just physical, but also, it sounds cliche, but kind of metaphorical. The point at which Bradley Pearson, vomits his guts out in front of Julian is also the part at which that sort of idea of repressing everything, of never writing a word kind of breaks for him, and he begins to say everything.
Noticed that.
There's this really brilliant kind of passage where he seems to take on a very Baffian, in fact, perspective on speed being conducive to producing some kind of plot. So he's vomited. He's told Julian that he's in love with her, and then there's this really tragicomic scene where he leans over to kiss her on the cheek and hold her wrist to convey his intentions, and she says, would you like to come to the opera with me? Someone else got me tickets, and he goes, oh, who's the someone else? And she says, it's my boyfriend. And Bradley Pearson goes home devastated, and then he realizes, I had in fact lived through almost the whole history of being in love in just over 2 days. I say almost the whole history because there is yet more to come. The condensed phenomenology of the business had been enacted within me. On the first day, I was simply a saint. I was so warmed and vitalised by sheer gratitude that I overflowed with charity. I was so privileged and glorified that resentment, every memory of any wrong done to me, seemed inconceivable. I wanted to go around touching people, blessing them, communicating my great happiness, the good news, the secret of how the whole universe was a place of joy and freedom, filled and running over with selfless rapture. And on it goes, and he says that there's the counterpart to that, which is that then his world was crushed, etc. But this is the point at which he stops sort of pontificating and starts actually producing, he produces the novel at a later point, but he starts talking to people. He actually starts acting rather than thinking and repressing.
Yeah. I think obviously we haven't plumbed the depths of Black Prince because that might be the work of a lifetime, but I think we've enjoyed it, Jo. Would that be fair?
Oh God, I love it. As I said, I think Iris Murdoch is like the best winter read possible because it's just absorbing and it's chaotic and crazy and it makes you laugh and it staves off my seasonal affective disorder by a good week, reading a Iris Murdoch novel.
I feel slightly ashamed to say this on the Booker Prize podcast where the Iris is about to be awarded, but I'd only read before Under the Net, which I thought was pretty good, and The Bell, which I thought was pretty good, very good. But The Black Prince, unbelievable. Apparently the 70s is meant to be our pomp. So I'm going to read more of 70s books, including The Sea. And I will give A Severed Head a go. Jo, I think it's pretty clear that I'd recommend this book to anybody who is ready for a bit of a wrestle. It's not an easy book. The consensus seems to be, at the moment, that it is their best novel, but maybe not a good start because it is quite complicated. Who would you recommend it to?
I think this seems counterintuitive because, as you said, there's this idea of an Iris Murdoch novel being something that's read by very high-minded intellectual people. But when you break it down, honestly, they are just really funny books about people ill-advisedly shagging. So I would recommend it to people who really, really love reality TV. Like if you are a Love Island or Big Brother fan, Iris Murdoch novels are for you. They're just drama and people, saying the wrong thing, kissing the wrong person and, occasionally ending up killing someone.
And that being tragic and silly and also hilarious.
Yeah. That's it for this week.
You can find out more about our November Book of the Month, The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch, at thebookerprizes.com. If you decide to give it a go, you can join the conversation at our Facebook book group at facebook.com/thebookerprizes.
Next week, we'll be talking to the 2022 Booker Prize winner, Shehan Karanatilaka, just days before this year's winner announcement on the 26th of November.
And finally, remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Substack at The Booker Prizes. Until next time.
Bye.
Goodbye. The Booker Prize podcast is hosted by Jo Hamya and me, James Walton. It's produced and edited by Kevin Miolo. And the executive producer is John Davenport. It's a Daddy Super Yacht production for the Booker Prizes.